The airport buzzed with echoes of rolling suitcases and distant announcements as travelers hurried from gate to gate. Amid the rushing crowds, sunlight streamed through towering glass windows, painting long streaks of gold across the polished floor. Near Gate 47, a young woman suddenly swayed, her fingers slipping from the handle of her small suitcase before her body crumpled silently to the ground. A passport slid from her loose grip and skidded across the tiles, stopping between the feet of passing travelers who froze in shock. Her carry-on bag tipped over beside her, spilling a boarding pass marked with a faint red stamp that read "Urgency Desk." No one moved at first, fear and confusion trapping them in place as the woman lay motionless on the cold airport floor. A man in his early 30s dropped his bag without hesitation and rushed toward her, dropping to his knees with urgency sharp in his eyes. He slipped an arm beneath her shoulders, lifting her slightly as he called out to the crowd for help. His voice cut through the static around them, firm yet filled with an unmistakable concern for a stranger he had never met. Before we continue, tell me your name or where you're watching from today. Leave a comment and remember to like and subscribe if you enjoy these emotional, real-life stories. Your support helps bring more moments like this to life. The woman's head tilted toward his chest, her breathing faint and uneven as her eyelashes fluttered in slow, fragile attempts to respond. Her skin felt cold under the terminal lights, her pulse tapping weakly against the man's fingertips. He removed his jacket and gently draped it over her shoulders, trying to warm a stranger whose collapse startled the entire hallway. People slowly gathered around them now, but none stepped closer than a hesitant few feet. The man glanced around, noticing the uncertainty in their faces, the familiar fear of not knowing what to do. He tilted the woman's head slightly to open her airway, his voice steady but urgent as he tried again to speak to her. "Miss, can you hear me?" he asked, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. His eyes softened as he leaned closer, trying to catch any sign of recognition behind her half-closed eyes. The airport noise seemed to fade around them, replaced by the quiet thrum of worry beating in his chest. She whispered a faint sound, barely audible, her lips trembling as though she wanted to speak but lacked the strength. The man frowned with determination, adjusting his grip carefully so as not to startle her. His heart pounded harder when he realized she was slipping deeper into unconsciousness with every shallow breath. Without thinking twice, he lifted her into his arms, rising to his feet with surprising steadiness despite the weight. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the woman's arm fell limply against him, her passport lying abandoned near the gate. The man tightened his grip, urgency taking over instinctively as he turned toward the nearest emergency help station. "Hang on," he murmured to her softly, his voice low and protective as he carried her through the stunned crowd. The busy airport suddenly felt too loud, too bright, too indifferent to the fragility he held in his arms. He moved quickly, guided not by duty, but by a compassion that refused to let a stranger suffer alone. Her head rested against his shoulder, her breath warm yet faint against the fabric of his shirt. And as he hurried down the corridor, he had no idea that helping her in this moment would unravel a story far more complicated than anyone watching could imagine. The man hurried toward the emergency station, each step echoing with urgency as he adjusted his grip on the unconscious woman in his arms. Crowds parted instinctively, their shocked faces blurring together as he moved past them with determined focus. Her limp hands swayed softly with his motion, her breathing shallow and uneven against his chest. He reached the help desk and called out, his voice firm despite the tremor of worry beneath it. A staff member jumped to attention, immediately grabbing a radio and calling medical responders to Gate 47. The man gently lowered the woman onto a padded bench, cradling her head with a care that spoke of instinct rather than obligation. Her eyelids fluttered weakly, revealing brief glimmers of distress that tightened his chest. He took her cold hand in his, rubbing her knuckles gently, as though warmth could coax her back to consciousness. The staff member handed him a blanket, and he tucked it around her shoulders with a protective tenderness. "Do you know her?" the staff member asked quietly, glancing from the woman to the man with curiosity. He shook his head, brushing back a strand of hair that had fallen across her face. "No," he murmured, his voice softening. "I just couldn't leave her on the floor." A small crowd gathered once more, but at a respectful distance this time, murmuring among themselves. Some whispered guesses, others offered concerned glances. But none dared intrude on the fragile moment unfolding between two strangers. The man ignored the noise, keeping his focus locked firmly on the woman fading in and out of consciousness. She stirred faintly, her lips parting as if trying to form a word but failing to push it past the tightness in her chest. He leaned closer, hoping to catch anything that might reveal her condition or what caused her collapse. Her fingers twitched against the blanket, a sign that fear or pain still lingered beneath her stillness. "Hey," he whispered, his voice steady despite the racing of his heart. "You're safe now. Help is coming. Just stay with me." His tone carried a soothing certainty, the kind that strangers rarely offer without hesitation. She responded with the faintest sigh, as if acknowledging the comfort she couldn't fully grasp. Finally, the distant wail of a medical cart approached, pushed swiftly by two airport paramedics. They knelt beside her immediately, checking her pulse, her breathing, and the pale tint of her skin beneath the fluorescent lights. The man stepped aside only enough to give them space, but remained close enough to reach her hand again. "What happened?" one paramedic asked, glancing at him while placing an oxygen mask over the woman's mouth. He relayed everything quickly: the collapse, the shallow breathing, the faint attempt at speech. The paramedic nodded, recognizing the critical details he had noted with surprising accuracy, as they continued examining her. One of the medics noticed the boarding pass that had fallen from her bag earlier. He retrieved it, frowning slightly at the red urgency desk stamp across the corner. The man recognized the stamp immediately, remembering how it had caught his eye in the split second before he rushed toward her. "Is that important?" the man asked, his voice dropping to a tense whisper. The paramedic studied the stamp for a moment longer before giving a vague, distracted nod. "Could be," he murmured, as they prepared to lift her onto a stretcher. "We'll need someone from the desk to verify her status." The man watched anxiously as they secured her, his hands clenching at his sides as though resisting the urge to intervene. She looked even smaller on the stretcher, her face drained of color, her chest rising with uneven breaths beneath the blanket. The paramedics exchanged quick glances, concern pressing into their expressions. "We need to move her now," one said, gripping the handles of the stretcher. The man stepped forward instinctively, walking beside them as they prepared to wheel her toward the medical wing. No one told him to stay back, and he didn't ask for permission. His presence simply flowed alongside hers as they began to move. The woman's eyelids fluttered once more, her gaze unfocused but searching. And in that fleeting, fragile moment, her fingers reached blindly toward the air, brushing lightly against his sleeve. The man caught her hand gently, steadying it with his own. "I'm right here," he whispered, voice steady and warm. Her lips trembled, a breath escaping her as though his presence offered an anchor she desperately needed. But before she could speak, the paramedics pushed forward, and the crowd's voices faded behind them. The airport lights glimmered overhead as he followed closely, unaware that this moment born of urgency and instinct was pulling him into a story far more tangled than a simple fainting spell. A story that would test his compassion in ways he never imagined, and reveal secrets the woman could no longer carry alone. The medical wing doors swung open as the paramedics rolled the stretcher inside, their movements swift but careful. The man followed closely, his eyes fixed on the woman's pale face as her breathing fluttered under the oxygen mask. The room felt colder than the bustling terminal, quiet enough for worry to echo against the walls. A nurse hurried over, adjusting wires and preparing monitors as the paramedics relayed details in quick, urgent tones. The man stayed near the doorway, unsure whether to step closer or give them space. Yet his feet refused to move back, held in place by a pull he couldn't explain. When the nurse finally turned toward him, she offered a brief, grateful nod for his help. "Did she speak at all before she collapsed?" she asked, her voice calm but edged with concern. He shook his head slowly, the memory of her trembling lips replaying in his mind. "She tried," he replied, keeping his voice low so as not to disturb the fragile quiet. But nothing came out. She looked scared, like she knew something was wrong before it happened. The nurse's expression tightened slightly, and she turned back to check the woman's pulse again. Another nurse approached with a small, plastic bag holding the woman's belongings, her passport, her small wallet, and the boarding pass with a red stamp. The man's eyes drifted toward it, curiosity and worry intertwining as he remembered the raised urgency of that single word. Something about it felt important in a way none of them fully understood. "Can you stay a moment?" the first nurse asked, motioning for him to remain near the bed. She might respond to a familiar voice when she wakes, even if you're not someone she knows. The request surprised him, but he nodded. Feeling the responsibility settle gently across his shoulders, he stepped closer to the bed, watching the rise and fall of her chest beneath the thin white blanket. Her hair lay scattered across the pillow, strands damp with sweat, her face drawn tight with exhaustion. He wondered who she was, what she had endured, and why she had been traveling alone. The nurse adjusted the oxygen mask, and the woman winced faintly in response, her fingers curling weakly. The man instinctively reached for her hand, catching it before it slipped off the edge of the bed. Her skin felt cold, but her fingers twitched as though recognizing the familiar support from earlier. "You're okay," he whispered softly, leaning just close enough for his words to reach her. "You're not alone right now. Just breathe. You're safe." His voice carried a calm strength that steadied even his own pounding heart. Her eyelids fluttered once, slowly, as if her body was fighting to wake itself from a heavy fog. He leaned closer, watching for any sign of awareness, hoping she could hear the reassurance hidden inside his voice. Her lips parted slightly, though no words followed, only a faint breath. A doctor entered the room, scanning her vitals before turning toward the man with a curious glance. "You brought her in?" he asked, folding his arms as he awaited the explanation. The man nodded, recounting everything he had seen from the moment she collapsed. The doctor listened intently, the crease between his brows deepening as he processed the details. He exchanged a quick glance with the nurse, then turned his attention to the boarding pass lying on the tray nearby. "That stamp," he murmured, pointing at the red urgency desk mark. "Do you know what it means?" the man asked, tension tightening the edges of his words. The doctor hesitated briefly before answering, his voice lower now, more cautious. "Usually, it means a traveler has an unresolved issue with their documentation. But sometimes it can signal a medical alert tied to their travel file." The man's eyebrows lifted as unease crept into his chest, his mind circling back to the frantic way she collapsed. "Medical alert," he repeated, unsure if he wanted to understand. The doctor nodded slowly, his expression turning thoughtful. Something the airline or agent might have flagged earlier, the doctor explained softly. Something she was supposed to report or check before boarding. The man felt a chill at the implication that this collapse might not have been sudden at all, but something she had already known was coming. A soft groan escaped the woman's throat, her fingers tightening faintly around his hand as her consciousness flickered like a dimming light. He leaned in closer, squeezing her hand back with gentle reassurance. Her eyelashes lifted weakly, revealing eyes clouded with confusion and pain. "Hey," he whispered, his voice warm and steady as it reached her. "You're all right? You're being helped. I'm here." She blinked slowly, her gaze shifting toward the sound of his voice before settling on his face. A faint tremor crossed her lips, a glimpse of fear mingled with relief. The doctor stepped forward, speaking softly to her as she struggled to stay awake. "You collapsed near the gate. You're safe now. Try not to move." The woman swallowed with difficulty, her throat tightening as though words were still trapped inside her. Her eyes drifted toward the small pile of belongings toward the boarding pass with the red stamp. She tried to lift her hand toward it, her breath quickening with sudden urgency. The man caught the movement, reaching to steady her shoulders gently so she wouldn't strain herself. "What is it?" he asked quietly, sensing the shift in her energy. Her trembling finger pointed toward the boarding pass, her expression tightening as a wave of worry flickered across her pale features. The doctor exchanged a cautious look with the nurse. The man followed the direction of her gaze and picked up the boarding pass. As he flipped it over, his eyes narrowed at a faint handwritten message on the back, something he hadn't noticed earlier. The ink was smudged from her fall, but the letters were still readable. "Do not let her fly." He felt his blood run cold as he looked back at the woman, whose tears had begun to gather at the corners of her eyes. This collapse hadn't been an accident. It had been a warning she never got the chance to explain. The man stared at the message on the back of the boarding pass, his breath catching as the truth settled in like a slow-moving chill. The handwritten warning felt hurried, desperate, as though someone had tried to protect her at the very last moment. He lifted his eyes to the woman who lay trembling beneath the hospital lights with fear flickering behind her half-opened gaze. Her lips moved under the oxygen mask, shaping sounds that never fully formed into words. She stared at the pass in his hand with a kind of urgency that made his heart race, as though she needed him to understand something critical. He stepped closer and lowered his voice, trying to steady her rising panic with a calm he barely felt. "You knew about this message?" he whispered gently, watching tears gather along the rim of her lashes. She blinked once, slowly but purposefully, her hand lifting weakly toward him before falling back against the blanket. The doctor observed quietly, sensing a truth trapped somewhere between her breath and silence. The nurse adjusted her monitors, glancing at the man with a soft seriousness in her eyes. "Whatever she's trying to say must matter," she murmured, her tone edged with quiet concern. The man nodded, tightening his grip on the boarding pass as though the paper itself held the next piece of her story. The doctor moved to her side and angled the oxygen mask slightly so her voice could be heard if she managed to speak. Her throat tensed as she tried to lift her head, but exhaustion weighed her down like a heavy tide. Her breathing quickened, shallow and uneven, each effort draining more of the strength she barely had. The man leaned in, offering his hand again, and she clung to his fingers with surprising determination. "Take your time," he whispered, his voice steady in the sterile quiet. "You don't have to rush. Just tell us what you can." She swallowed hard, her voice a faint rasp beneath the mask as a single breath of sound escaped her lips. The man bent closer, trying to catch the fragile whisper before it disappeared into the room. Her fingers trembled, tightening around his hand as she forced out one barely audible word. "Danger," she breathed, her voice breaking as fear shimmered in her eyes. The doctor stiffened, exchanging a sharp glance with the nurse as the weight of the warning settled in. The man felt a cold shiver run through him, sensing that the collapse was only the surface of something far deeper. "What kind of danger?" he asked softly, keeping his tone calm despite the unease curling inside him. Her eyes fluttered again, filled with worry so deep it seemed carved into her expression. She coughed weakly, struggling as though the truth inside her was heavier than her breath could carry. Her free hand lifted shakily, pointing toward her small purse lying on the tray beside the bed. The man followed her gaze, understanding instantly as he reached for the bag. He opened it gently, searching through the neatly arranged items with respect and caution. Inside, he found a folded envelope sealed with a thin strip of medical tape. The woman's eyes widened slightly, urging him silently to take it. He lifted it carefully, examining the faint writing on the outside, and hurried. Uneven letters, for emergency only. The doctor's expression hardened with concern as he stepped closer to inspect the envelope. "This may contain medical instructions," he murmured, though his tone carried an uncertainty that hinted at something more. The man held it delicately. Feeling the tremor of anticipation rise through him, the woman's grip tightened around his hand, her eyes locking onto his with a desperation that pierced straight through him. She wasn't just asking them to read it, she was asking him to understand something essential, something she hadn't been able to say before collapsing. He opened the envelope carefully, the thin paper crackling as he unfolded its contents. Inside was a single page filled with hurried handwriting across the front. As his eyes scanned the first few lines, his expression changed instantly, shock tightening the line of his jaw. The doctor leaned over his shoulder, reading the words with growing alarm. The nurse stepped closer too, her breaths catching as the truth began to reveal itself line by line. The woman watched them, fear pulling at her features as the man continued reading. His voice trembled as he spoke the words aloud. Barely above a whisper. She wasn't supposed to fly, because she's the only witness to something she wasn't meant to see. The man lowered the paper slowly, its edges trembling between his fingers as the meaning behind each sentence sank deeper into his chest. The room felt suddenly smaller, the sterile lights too bright, the air too thin, as though even the walls sensed the weight of the truth revealed. The doctor exhaled sharply, his jaw tightening in recognition of the seriousness buried within the hurried handwriting. The woman's eyes shimmered with fear as she watched them read, desperate for anyone to understand why she had collapsed before boarding. The man looked at her with renewed concern, realizing she hadn't fainted from exhaustion alone. She had been running from something that had found her even within the walls of an airport. He stepped closer, lowering the paper so she could see it in his hand, offering her reassurance through the tension pulsing in her gaze. "You're safe here," he whispered, though uncertainty tugged at his voice. "No one can reach you right now. Just breathe." Her fingers curled weakly around his, grateful for the anchor he offered. The doctor straightened and motioned for the nurse to secure the room door. His voice, low and steady, edged with caution. "Until we know the full context, no one unfamiliar enters." The nurse nodded quickly, locking the door and drawing the privacy curtain. Halfway small gestures that suddenly felt urgent and necessary. The man unfolded the page again, scanning the next lines with increasing disbelief. Each sentence seemed more alarming than the last, revealing the fragile chain of events that had driven her into panic. The doctor leaned in as well, and together they absorbed the truth that had pushed her to collapse at gate 47. She witnessed something during her last business trip. The man read, pausing as he processed the words. Something involving people with enough power to silence her. He swallowed hard, realizing the implications behind what he held. She tried to report it, but someone intercepted the message. The woman's breathing hitched as she tried to speak, the mask muffling her faint attempts at forming words. The man leaned closer, squeezing her hand gently, urging her not to strain herself. Her eyes filled with tears, frustration trembling beneath her exhaustion as she pointed toward the paper again. The doctor watched closely, understanding her urgency, and nodded for the man to continue. He scanned lower, stopping at a line that chilled him enough to stall his breath. His voice dropped, steady yet shaken. As he read the next sentence aloud, she received threats telling her not to return home, warning that boarding the flight would put her at risk. The room fell silent, except for the faint rhythm of the heart monitor pulsing beside her bed. The nurse pressed a hand over her mouth, realizing the gravity of what the woman had been carrying alone. The man knelt beside the bed, lowering himself to her eye level, letting her see the sincerity in every word he spoke next. "You're safe now," he whispered again, softer this time, as though speaking directly to her fear. "You don't have to handle this by yourself anymore. I won't let anything happen to you." Her lips parted beneath the mask, a faint trembling forming the shape of a single fragile word. "Please." It carried fear, exhaustion, and a plea for help tangled together. The man nodded, his own resolve strengthening as he gently brushed her hair away from her forehead. "You're not alone," he said firmly, sensing her need to hear it with certainty. "I'm here. We all are. Whatever you saw, whatever danger you've been running from, we'll help you face it." His voice wrapped around her like a protective shield, filling the sterile room with a warmth she hadn't known since the moment she fled for her life. The doctor placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, offering a calm nod of reassurance. "We'll notify security discreetly," he said, his tone steady despite the underlying tension. "Medical staff will stay with her at all times until we understand the threat fully." The woman closed her eyes as relief washed over her, her body finally relaxing into the bed as though letting go of a weight she had carried too long. Her fingers loosened their grip on the man's hand. Though she did not release him completely, the man rose slowly, still holding her hand. Feeling her trust settle into the space between them like a fragile but undeniable connection. He looked at the letter again, at the warning that had brought her to this moment. And he felt something shift inside him, an instinct, a responsibility, a promise forming quietly beneath his breath. Whatever danger she was facing, whatever secret she carried, he would not walk away. The man folded the letter carefully, its edges creased from the trembling grip he had held it with. He slipped it onto the small tray beside her bed. Knowing every line inside it meant her collapse had been more than fear, it had been desperation. The woman watched him with weary eyes, the weight of unspoken truths lingering in the air like a quiet storm, gathering strength. The doctor adjusted the woman's fore, his expression calm but troubled beneath the practiced professionalism. He spoke softly, almost cautiously, as though aware he was stepping into a story none of them fully understood. "Until security arrives, she shouldn't be left alone," he murmured, lowering his voice to keep the atmosphere steady. The man nodded, instinct anchoring him to the bedside as though he had been meant to be there all along. He pulled the chair closer and sat down, his posture straight with quiet vigilance. Her fingers tightened around his again, trembling slightly, as though seeking reassurance she could not find in words. Outside the room, hurried footsteps echoed down the hall. Nurses, staff, distant travelers passing the medical wing. Yet inside, everything felt still, the white walls cocooning them from the chaos of the airport. The woman's breathing steadied, her chest rising in soft, fragile waves beneath the oxygen mask. The man studied her features, the tension etched into her brow, the exhaustion softening her expression. He wondered how long she had been running, how many nights she had spent looking over her shoulder. Fear had carved itself into her silence, but her gaze, though clouded, held strength beneath its trembling surface. The nurse returned with warm blankets, draping one gently over the woman's legs. She glanced at the man, offering a small nod of approval for the care he was giving. He brushed his thumb lightly across the woman's hand, his voice quiet as he leaned closer to her. "You did the right thing," he whispered, letting her feel the truth in his tone. "You tried to warn them. You fought to get here, and whatever comes next, we'll handle it together." Her eyes softened, filling with tears that didn't fall, as though she were finally allowing herself to believe him. The doctor glanced toward the door, listening as two security officers approached with steady, heavy steps. When they entered, their expressions shifted from routine professionalism to cautious alertness. The doctor handed them the envelope, pointing toward the red-stamped boarding pass beside it. The officers exchanged tense glances, reading the first lines quickly before lowering the document with grim understanding. One officer nodded at the man, acknowledging the unexpected role he had taken on. "You stayed with her," he said quietly. "That may have saved her life." The man didn't answer immediately, his attention fixed on the woman as she watched the officers nervously. He leaned closer, squeezing her hand with reassuring warmth that grounded her in the room. "It's all right," he whispered softly. "They're here to help. No one is taking you anywhere without your consent." The officers stepped back, understanding the fragility of the moment and the comfort the man provided. They stood guard near the door, keeping the room secure while speaking softly into their radios. The woman's breathing eased, the fear in her eyes slowly giving way to cautious relief. She shifted slightly, her fingers brushing weakly against the man's wrist. Her gaze steadied on him, searching his face with a glimmer of gratitude she could not vocalize. He held her stare with calm reassurance, feeling the silent weight of her trust settle gently between them. "You're safe now," he murmured again, his voice quiet but certain. "And you won't face this alone, whatever it is." Her lips pressed softly together, her breath trembling as she exhaled slowly beneath the mask. For the first time since she had collapsed at Gate 47, the woman closed her eyes without fear, tightening her expression. She rested against the pillow with a fragile peace, knowing someone had finally stopped, stayed, and carried her when she could no longer run. Her story was far from over yet for now. She wasn't facing it alone. The room settled into a quiet rhythm, the soft beeping of the monitors blending with the muted voices of the security officers outside. The woman rested with her eyes closed, the tension in her face slowly dissolving into fragile calm. The man remained beside her, steady and patient, his presence a constant reassurance in a day filled with fear. After several long minutes, her eyelids fluttered open again, clearer this time, her gaze finding him with a confused softness. She blinked slowly, as though piecing together how she had ended up in a medical room instead of on her flight. The man leaned forward gently, offering a warm smile that eased the worry gathering behind her tired eyes. "You fainted," he said softly, brushing a stray hair from her forehead. "But you're okay now. The doctors are watching over you. And the message you were trying to deliver. It's safe." She exhaled shakily, a fragile breath of relief that hinted at how hard she had been holding herself together. With effort, she lifted her hand toward the letter he had opened earlier. The man retrieved it carefully and held it out, but she shook her head, her fingers weakly motioning that she wanted him to keep it. Her eyes shimmered with trust, asking him silently to carry what she no longer could. A nurse stepped inside quietly, checking her vitals with gentle precision. She gave the woman a reassuring smile, then turned to the man with a grateful nod. "Her condition is stabilizing," she murmured softly. "She needs rest, but she's not in immediate danger anymore." The man felt tension slide from his shoulders, comforted by the certainty in the nurse's tone. The woman watched them both, tears gathering again, not of fear, but relief softened by exhaustion. She tried to speak, her voice muffled beneath the oxygen mask, and the man leaned closer to understand. Her fingers tightened around his as she formed two unsteady words, each one trembling with overwhelmed gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice as fragile as her breathing. The man squeezed her hand gently, shaking his head with a quiet humility that eased her trembling. "You don't owe me anything," he said softly. "I just did what anyone should do. You needed help, and I was there." The emotions she had buried for hours or perhaps days finally spilled into her eyes, a trembling breath slipping from her lips. He lifted her hand to steady it, offering warmth as she steadied herself against a storm she had fought too long alone. The doctor approached then, switching her mask to a lighter nasal tube to help her speak more easily. She swallowed, her voice still thin, but stronger now with the mask removed. I was so scared," she whispered, her eyes glistening beneath the dim lights. "I didn't know who to trust. I didn't think anyone would believe me." The man shook his head gently, brushing comfort into her shaking fingers. "You're safe now," he said, keeping his voice low and sure. The officers read the letter. "They know you weren't imagining anything. You did the right thing coming here instead of flying." She closed her eyes briefly, absorbing the words as though letting relief settle into her bones. The security officers stepped closer then, their voices respectful as they addressed her. "When you're ready," one said softly, "we'll take a statement and make sure you're fully protected. You're not going anywhere alone, and no one is getting near you without clearance." Her eyes widened with gratitude, fear loosening its grip at last. The man remained at her side throughout, his presence steady and grounding as she answered the officer's gentle questions. When her strength waned, he placed a hand on her shoulder, encouraging her to rest. The officers stepped back, giving her space, understanding she had endured more than enough for one day. As she drifted into sleep once more, the man stood slowly, stretching the stiffness in his back while still holding her hand. Her breathing softened, the rise and fall of her chest steady now. Wrapped beneath the warmth of blankets and safety she hadn't felt since before the danger began. He stayed beside her long after the officers left, long after the doctor dimmed the lights, long after the hallway noise quieted into a distant hum. He watched over her with a quiet vigilance, knowing he couldn't leave not yet, not until she woke without fear in her eyes. When she finally stirred again, hours later, her voice was clearer, her gaze calm but searching. She found him still there, sitting beside her with the same compassion that had carried her from the airport floor to safety. "You stayed," she whispered, disbelief softening her words. The man smiled gently, the warmth in his expression easing every tremor still lingering in her chest. "Of course," he murmured, brushing her hand lightly. "I wasn't going to walk away, not after what you've been through." She looked at him with gratitude so deep it shimmered across her expression like soft light. In that fragile room, surrounded by monitors and quiet hums of safety, she realized she wasn't facing the unknown alone anymore. He had carried her into the medical wing. But now, for the first time, she felt someone was carrying her through the fear as well.